Hello again and welcome to Undercover. I'm your host, Kevin Bousquet. Now, we are picking up in the segment that we have been doing on expert witnesses, people who work in private sector, who are experts in their field, work within our court system, that kind of thing. And our topic today is on document examination, forensic document examination, signature analysis. Now, we're going to be doing a whole segment of fraud in Canada, and we're going to be talking a lot about this particular field. Now, my guest today is Graham Ospreay of GP Ospreay and Associates, and Graham is a forensic document examiner and forgery analyst. He is here today with close to 20 years of experience. 11 years have been in his own business. Now, I'll tell you, I have literally had to take about an hour before the show and go through his curriculum vitae or CV, or if you don't know what a curriculum vitae is, it's the resume of his background and his qualifications. I think he should have probably delivered it here on a forklift. It's just that thick. It goes forever. I'll try and summarize his background. He has a very wide security and investigation background. He's a member of the Fellow American College of Forensic Examiners. He just finished sitting on the board of the Society for Industrial Security, Canadian Society for Industrial Security, which in my field there are only really two associations that matter. That is one of them, and the other is the CPIO. So I'm a little nervous because he's actually a peer of mine, and he sits on one of the main associations in Canada with respect to security and private investigation. He's sat on a number of various committees. He's taught lectures municipally, federally, to the government, that kind of thing. I'm only just touching on some of the very, very basics of his CV. It just absolutely goes forever. He would be a really hard person to take apart if someone wanted to challenge his credibility in a court environment. Graham, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
Now, I always like to tell a little bit of a war story before I start the show to help the audience kind of assimilate, how I've used in my career people in your business. So I'm just going to tell a case that I was involved in some time ago, and where I've used a forensic document examiner. Now, I do a lot of work for casinos, and this was a particular case where a particular person was in Vegas, and he basically ended up owing a bunch of casinos thousands and thousands of dollars, to the point of about $150,000 to $200,000 that he basically walked away from and did not pay the casinos. Now, like any creditor, what happened is when he came back into Canada, the casinos teamed up and they hired Canadian counsel to sue this man for his failure to pay these casino debts. Now, what my agency did was we did, before we started the lawsuit on this one, we were retained by the Canadian counsel to do an asset investigation on this person. So what I did was we looked to see if this person was worth suing. Did he have vehicles in his name? Did he have property in his name? Did he rent or own his home? Was he self-employed or employed? Or was he someone that just wasn't worth suing because he had no assets? Now, when I finished the asset investigation and reported it to the Canadian counsel, they ultimately succeeded in getting an undefended judgment against this man. Now, what they did was they filed a writ of possession. They registered it against his home, of which he was exclusively on title, of which there was considerable equity, and they went to enforce that writ of possession by way of getting ready to seize the property under the writ of possession. Now, what he did was, as a means to save his home, is he filed a motion to set the judgment aside or to appeal the judgment, although he didn't defend it in the first place. Now, he would be one of many people who came close to losing their home as a result of a gambling addiction. One of the things that he said in his motion materials is he denied being there. He said, "It wasn't me. These casino lines of credit were filled out by someone who was impersonating me. I was never there. This is not my signature. I know nothing of this." So now I'm faced with the task that I've got to prove, number one, that he was in Vegas, and number two, that the signatures are in fact truly the gentleman that I've been doing the asset investigation on. Now, with respect to proving he was in Vegas, it wasn't my call. This was something that we went back to the clients and said, look, go through your videotapes, get us copies of, the documentation that he filled out when he signed into the hotel, and come up with as many signatures as you can. If you have any video of him, being in the casino or at the hotel desk, you guys provide that, and I'll work on trying to find signatures of him here in Canada, so we could take the signatures in Canada with my debtor to the person of whom we believed was the person who filled out these applications. So what I had to do is I had to try and find places where I could get signatures of this man, so I could hire a forensic document examiner to do a comparison of the signatures, from the signature that we in the United States to the signatures that I was going to have to find and produce to the document examiner. So what I did was I basically closed my eyes and figured, where is it that I can find in our system where a person's going to do a signature that I can use? And I basically pulled the documents, the land transfer documents and the mortgage charge that was on his home, a public document, and there was a signature on there. I pulled the articles of incorporation on a company that he owned, pulled the microfiche, photocopied the actual articles, got another signature. I was able to pull the financing statement on his vehicle for a vehicle that he was financed, and I took 3 signatures and I basically submitted that to the forensic document examiner through legal counsel for them to make the comparison. Now, ultimately, when this motion was heard, this gentleman at the last minute basically worked out a financial settlement. He basically admitted that, yes, I was there, and he basically took a second mortgage on his home and settled with the casino creditors. But that was a situation where I have recently used a forensic document examiner. Now, Graham, sorry to ramble. Now, in a situation like that, where I'm providing you with samples of signatures, I'm saying, look, here are my signatures. These are the signatures of my client.
Yes.
So my clients. How is it you would be able to compare the two? What is it you're doing that would actually help us compare those signatures to see if they're truly our debtor, our subject of investigation?
Most definitely. Well, Kevin, the case and the situation that you described is a very common one, and probably one of the more common issues and problems and type of case that we would handle as in forensic document examination. In this case, you had an individual who was denying writing or signing his name on markers for debts within a casino. In that case, you classify that as a denied signature. And the comparison purposes for identifying the individual as to whether or not he actually authored or signed those particular documents, you've done the right thing. You've gone and you've searched for sample signatures or known signature specimens that the examiner would compare to questioned documents, in this case, the markers from the casino. We look for similarities and differences between the two. Okay. But it's important that an examiner, such as what yourself is as an investigator, would compile documents and submit known specimens that are contemporary to the question document. People's handwriting and their signatures can change over a period of time, so you want to look at like-type documents, which is other signatures on either formal contracts, if you're comparing to formal contracts, markers to markers, checks to checks. You need to have similar type documents which are dated around the same time frame. Okay. We base it upon identifying similarities and or differences of handwriting identification characteristics between the question signatures, in your case, and the known specimens being submitted.
Okay, so when we bring you into court, okay, and say, look, we're at this motion, the document examiner is here, what is it you're showing us? Are you showing us like cards, or like, what is it? Are you just offering your opinion saying, look, I looked at them, yeah, it's the same guy? Like, what are you doing when you come into court? What are you bringing in?
Okay, well, first of all, in the court process, any examiner or any expert has to qualify within their expertise. They're qualified before the judge first, whereupon counsel on both sides an opportunity to challenge the credentials and the evidence of the individual that's being put forth as an expert before the court.
I take it with this CV, you're not really...
Well, I think any good attorney would still do worth their can of beans, would still make a crack at anybody. But in this case, we then go through a process of identifying, ourselves. Once we're qualified by the judge, then an opinion is rendered, depending on the questioning, the line of questioning you're flowing with your client or the solicitor that's retained your services. From that, opinion is rendered, and then we would produce photographic exhibits.
Okay, let's just talk about that, because that's important about witness, expert witness. You're saying that there is a whole qualification period that takes place just to decide whether or not you can even give evidence.
That's correct.
So,
That's correct.
So all of the sides get a chance to examine you, including the judge, just to say, yeah, the guy's an expert, we'll let him talk.
That's correct, and that's not just exclusive to forensic document examination. Any profession or forensic science or anywhere where you have someone who's claiming to be an expert in their field would go through that qualification stage.
So that's when we see, when we see experts and we see them advertising and they say court qualified. Is that what they mean?
I believe that's probably what they're trying to say, but you want to make sure that they've testified, and more importantly that they've testified or they've handled cases and examined cases in the type of case that's before the courts now. So in this case, if it's a signature, you want to make sure your expert has qualified in signature identification previously.
Okay. Now, have there ever been cases where you haven't qualified?
No.
Never. You've always been able to qualify?
Not within my area of expertise. And I think that what you have to realize is when a case comes in to the laboratory, the first job that I as an examiner have to assess is whether or not I have the expertise to be able to provide an opinion in this case. If I do not possess that expertise, then I must refer it to another examiner, another expert in that field.
Okay, sorry to ramble on this particular topic, but what's the longest qualification period you've ever gone? Like how long has it lasted where, what's the longest it's taken for you to be qualified?
That's a tough one. I think probably about 45 minutes.
Wow.
When a particular solicitor went on to questions that were really unrelated, and the sitting judge eventually cut the individual off.
Okay. Now, let me ask this question. How did you get into this business? I know you also have an investigative and security background. You've got a number of security designations here. What brought you into the field of forensic document examination, that kind of thing?
Well, I suppose it goes back to my childhood and beyond, through high school and after high school, where I've always had a love for history, archaeology. One of my first vocations after high school, I was trained as a master copyist. I went through 3 different formal apprenticeships in the reproduction and repair of works of art and documents. From that, I went to further apprenticeships for forensic document examination. So I've had a love ever since my childhood through training since high school and into current training. And in this particular case, as an expert, you never stop learning. You're consistently always learning.
Okay. Now, how old is this? Do we call it a science? Do we call it a field? Like, how old is this? Like, how long has this been going on where people are manipulating signatures and copying things? I mean, my position now, it must be completely out of control with mortgage fraud, impersonation. How old is this technology? Can I call it technology? What do you call it? Is it a science or?
Most certainly, it is a science. Forensic document examiner follows principles, the scientific principles for identification stage. Okay. In regards to your main question of how old is forgery, well, from time began. I mean, if you have a look at the screen, you'll see that there is a sample going back to 8,000 to 1500 BC, where back in the ancient times when they were trading in commerce from one city or town to another, the ancients devised a tally system whereupon they would mark in clay the amount of product or produce that they were trading. Well,
so
clearly,
this is a form of money in the olden days?
No, it was an accounting system that would identify, such as if you were to write down on your pad of paper how much cattle or how much herbs or beer that I would be trading or selling with you. Okay. And so they would be marked on tokens and they would be carried either on a string. But back in the ancient times, they found that they were easy to forge. People could scratch another line in or alter one. So what the ancients devised is a form of bulle, which was a round clay, and the tokens would go in that. They'd mark the outside. So they could go from port to port and city and know that when they broke this open, that nothing had been altered in the inside. So in effect, back to 8,000 to 1500 BC, you have what we would classify as our very first security envelopes.
So back to the say that again?
8,000 to 1500
is
BC.
When we first started to see evidence of people starting to counterfeit.
I wouldn't say it's the first time. I think it's one of the earliest times, and clearly the earliest times where protection methods were put into place to prevent counterfeiting.
Okay. Now, going through your curriculum vitae, it sounds like you're involved in a number of areas and a number of different cases. Can you kind of walk us through some of the stuff that you're doing, some of the cases you're getting? But before you do that, can you just tell us? We know you're working for law firms because you've worked for one of my clients for many, many years. We both have a client in common. I wish I could say the name, but we obviously can't. Besides the law firms that are hiring you, who else is hiring you? Like, is there a pattern to your clients? Can you give us an idea of who you're working for? Obviously,
in the legal system, and as you've indicated, for various law firms in this province, in this country, and other countries, both North America and overseas, the legal community is a hub of the business hub.